Hello there! Thank you for tuning into Duckbricks and welcome to a very special LEGO Bionicle collection showcase. So a couple of months ago I posted a video that was showcasing the complete collection of 2001 to 2003 Bionicle masks, at least the ones that were regularly released in sets. And so that kinda kickstarted me on a pretty long journey to owning not one, but two of every single LEGO Bionicle mask literally ever made. I have one copy of each mask, obviously with these sets themselves, and I have a massive display showcasing every single LEGO Bionicle mask in one place, in one display, up on my wall. Now I will have to give a few disclaimers. This is of course never going to be 100% complete. There do exist a few random misprints out in the wild that are pretty much impossible to obtain. Stuff like the brown kaukau or a yellow ruru, where I think only one or two of them exist in the world. And of course there's gotta be stuff like the platinum evoke, which is basically the most expensive piece of LEGO that's ever been sold. So I'm probably not going to ever be able to own those unless something crazy happens in the future. But besides those ultra rare, highly exclusive masks that are pretty much one of a kind or really impossible to find nowadays, my collection is pretty much 100% complete with all of the misprints that you can purchase off of Bricklink, as well as all of the regular set retail masks. The only thing that I am missing is a pearl gold Kraken. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Kraken was the Mask of Shadows. LEGO changed the color of their gold plastic from flat dark gold to pearl gold sometime between 2005 and 2006, and as such, a very limited production run of Krakens in pearl gold were made. Unfortunately though, I can't find that online for sale basically anywhere. I think the last one sold for around $250 to $350, and now there literally aren't any listings on Bricklink or eBay or really anywhere that I could even find it. So if you're selling one, please let me know down in the comments because I'd love to talk more, because really that's the only mask left that I'm completely missing from my collection to be fully complete. Because really, that's the only mask left that technically can be obtained through regular means that I unfortunately was not able to find myself. So please let me know if you have that. But otherwise, let's go take a look right now. This massive collection does not just include every Kanohi mask, but it also includes every helmet, every face, even the Vizorek carapaces. Everything is there fully complete. If it's a Bionicle face collectible, it's on my wall. This includes both G1 and G2 as well, with a few surprises in between. So let's go take a look without further ado. Alright, so here we are entering the vast LEGO collection. As we turn the wall here, you'll immediately notice there are a ton of new decorations, and that is all of the Bionicle Kanohi masks and helmets. Let's just start off in chronological order, where I'm going to be walking through each mask and essentially what the rarity of the piece is. This massive display here that can barely fit within the range of my camera covers pretty much everything from 2001 to 2003, with a few special legendary masks in the middle. Starting off, of course, you have the classic Kanohi Hau in all of its colors for Tahu, Gali, Liwa, Kopaka, Pohatu, and Onua, plus the silver and gold variants of the Hau itself for the both powerless and the special golden variety as well. We also have Jaler's Yellow Hau right here, which was a special recolor for 2001, but that's not all, because moving into the center here, there's the special Chrome Hau, which came with the Power Pack all the way back in 2001, as well as the Infected Hau from the Muwaka and Kane Ra set. The Infected Haus are actually quite rare because each of these was actually hand-painted, which is why every single one is kinda unique, which I think is a really cool look for the piece. I also have the two Haus from the Stars lineup from 2010. It's actually a completely different mold with a plus axle made to fit onto a different headpiece, which was introduced almost 10 years after the original mold. Plus the dark gray version, which was used in the Nuva and Asanui set to represent Jaler's lifeless mask. So a brief explanation of the powers and backstory of the Kanohi Hau. This is probably one of the most iconic Bionicle masks ever. It was worn by who was essentially the main character in 2001, Toamata, and it's kind of become a symbol for what Bionicle is throughout its 10-year run. Over the many years of the theme, the Hau was worn by several different characters, but most notably Toa Nuva, and even Toa Likan, and we'll take a look at Toa Likan's special variant of the Great Kanohi Hau in a little bit. Now, the Kanohi Hau's power is the Mask of Shielding. So how it works is that it generates a force field that surrounds and moves with its user to block physical attacks. We can see the Kanohi Hau in action throughout many different pieces of Bionicle media, such as the Matanui online game where Onua calls upon his great Kanohi Hau to activate a shield blocking out an infected Toa Liwa, and later on in the Mask of Light, when Tahu Nuva uses his Kanohi Hau Nuva to block a falling swath of lava. Even Makuta himself adopts a twisted, infected version of the Kanohi Hau just to reflect the power he has over corruption, which is of course what the infected Hau stands for. He even uses infected Kanohi Haus and other infected Kanohi to control the Rahi of Matanui to continuously attack the Matoran. Officially, the Kanohi Hau is the symbol of the Great Spirit Matanui, and as such, is one of the most important and iconic masks across the universe, despite not being particularly special or legendary, at least compared to some of the other masks. The same continues on for the kaukaus, or the Mask of Water Breathing down here, featuring colors for all 6 Toa, plus silver and gold, as well as a few very special misprints over here. So these are easily the rarest Kanohi kaukaus really ever in existence. They were not supposed to come in these colors, but due to factory misprints, we now have several of them in production. I paid around $200 each for these masks, which is a little bit much, but for something so rare and one of a kind, I definitely needed it to complete my collection. The transparent yellow one and transparent light blue one, as you can see here, are very, very special misprints. So the Kanohi kaukau was the one worn by Toa Gali, and it essentially allows the user to breathe underwater for an extended period of time. It even allows you to breathe under liquid protodermis. This mask was notably worn by, of course, Toamata Gali, as well as Holly, who had become a Toa of her own, but instead swap out this mask for something else when she became a Toa. As the symbol of the Toa of Water, the Kanohi kaukau had a massive statue dedicated to it on the shores of Naho Falls on the island of Matanui. Moving on from those though, we have the Mask of Levitation, the Kanohi Miru. Now this basically just appears in these standard colors, plus a teal color for Kongu with the Matoran, as well as a relatively common transparent green Miru. This was actually showcased in Legoland, California. They were given out en masse, so this is not a very rare mask, but it is a pretty nice recolor to have, especially because you could imagine that it's showcasing the mask in flight. This Kanohi Miru, or Mask of Levitation, was most famously worn by Toa Liwa. It allowed him to float and glide on air, which was particularly useful because Liwa was, of course, the Toa of air. Other prominent users include Kongu, at least during his time on Matanui, as well as the Avmatoran Tanma, who utilized it in his fight against the Makuta in Karda Nui. Moving on up here, we have the Kanohi Akaku, or the Mask of X-Ray Vision. This is basically just your standard 8 colors plus a sand blue for Matoro, and the same kind of continues on for both the Kakama, the Mask of Speed, and the Pakari, the Mask of Strength, which you can see here come in 2 special colors due to the Mektoran, and you've also got these standard colors up here. Now those masks actually come in a few other colors as well, particularly the Pakari worn by Takua, as well as the one worn by Nuparu. The Kakama unfortunately only comes in these colors to my knowledge, plus just one extra teal color for the Tarakava set. So these here are the remaining 3 masks of the Toamata. The Akaku, the Mask of X-Ray Vision, was commonly worn by Toa Madakopaka, as well as worn by Matoro and Solek. You can see this Mask of X-Ray Vision in action throughout several different pieces of Bionicle media, such as the Matanui online game and even again the Mask of Light. Meanwhile, the Kakama was the Mask of Speed, which was worn by Pohatu, Huki, and Photok, among many others. The Kakama provided a constant boost to the user's natural speed, which allowed them to move and run at incredible speeds on all surfaces, far faster than the eye could follow. In addition, the user also had heightened reflexes to keep up with their increased speed, along with resistance to the friction the increased speed caused. You can see this mask in action in the Matanui online game, when Pohatu uses it to speed himself and Takua out of a dangerous cave-in. And last but not least of these Mata masks is the Pakari, the Mask of Strength, providing a constant boost to Onua's natural strength. This mask was famously worn by several other very prominent Matoran, such as Kapura, Nuparu, Takua, Maidak, Onepu, Taipu, and even Kirop. With that though, we can move on to the Nuva masks, and you can see here we have the Hau Nuva, Mask of Shielding, Kaukau Nuva, Miru Nuva, Akaku Nuva, Kakama Nuva, and Pakari Nuva. Now, the rarest nuva masks are something I covered in one of my other videos. These are the protodermic nuva masks, where each one can cost up to $200 to $300 per mask. Besides the miru, for whatever reason, because I believe it was included in a bulk box, so pretty much everyone who got that bulk box of Bionicle parts got the silver miru. Everything else, though, was pretty limited, and you had to just get really lucky when getting blind mask packs back in the day to get one of these. It was actually quite unfortunate because a couple of years ago I was contemplating purchasing them, but felt that the price of $75 to $90 was a little bit too much per mask. But now that value has tripled, so there we are. We have the mask now, but at what cost? So the in-universe explanation behind these is that they are just the modified and mutated versions of the original 6 masks we just took a look at, but modified by energized protodermis. The fact that they are nuva masks means that the Toa can share their powers with any other user, which is incredibly helpful when you're in a team of Toa but only have a specific set of masks to draw from. Since the powers are basically the same as what we just discussed, there's no real need to actually delve deep into them. I just want to make one final note. These silver protodermic nuva masks are supposed to represent the powerless versions of the masks, particularly when the Borak Call stole the powers of the Toa nuva, and as such their masks turned silver and powerless, and they could not use them or channel the elemental powers. Another variant of the nuva masks are the 4 different infected Kanohi Hau nuva, which you can see here, representing Tahu's infection over the course of the Mask of Light film. You can easily see that these 4 variants are quite different from each other. Despite the last 2 being relatively similar, you can very clearly see a stark difference between them. In the Mask of Light, Tahu's Hau nuva was scratched by the poison of a Rakshi, and after repeated Rakshi blasts of anger, he turned against his fellow Toa and eventually had to be healed by Toa Gali, after being frozen by Kopaka. These infected masks represent how his mask looked with the poison running through his system. Also from this era of Bionicle was the Kanohi Evoki, the powerful Mask of Light. Originally produced in flat dark gold for Takanuva, it also came in 2 different shades of silver. You can't quite tell from the camera here, but if you look closely, this mask right here is in a different shade of silver than this one. And the reason for that being is that Takanuva was released again in 2010 for the Bionicle Stars line when LEGO had updated their silver color. So this is the original silver color, it's a bit of a lighter color, and this is the newer one, which is a slightly darker silver. The difference is very minute, but you can kinda see it on camera here. Of course, I've also included the mutated larger Evoki from the Shadow Titan Takanuva in 2008, as well as the very special glittery mask which came with Takanuva in the original 2003 set. Despite not being a legendary Kanohi mask, the Evoki was one of the most important and powerful masks in the Matoran universe, and was one of a kind. This was the Mask of Light, created on the island of Artaka as a safeguard against the possibility of the Brotherhood of Makuta turning evil, which of course they did. Now, because of this, the mask has been hotly contested by many beings across history and time in the Matoran universe, specifically the Toa and the Brotherhood of Makuta. Of course, its current bearer is Takanuva, the Toa of Light. When Takanuva's light was partially drained and he arrived on Cardanui, the Evoki was turned into a gunmetal gray color, and enlarged due to the energies of Cardanui, taking on a completely new mold in LEGO which could be seen in the center of the display. Lastly, as mentioned at the beginning of this video, there was a very special solid platinum Evoki, which remains the current most expensive LEGO piece ever sold, which was only given out as a contest in 2003. And of course, if we're talking about rare and powerful masks, I had to include the Kanohi inika alongside here. Now technically, these 2 versions, here and here, came from the Vezon set in silver and the Maxilos and Spinax set as armor, but these are supposed to depict the Evoki on the back of Vezon's face, so I'll allow it, even though it's very clearly an older design. The most rare one out of all of these is of course the Pearl Gold Evoki right here. This only came in the Toa Matanui set from 2009, which was a larger Titan, and this mask will put you back around $100 to $200 on Bricklink. So this is certainly one of the rarest ones in my collection, and I was super lucky enough to get it when it first came out and not have to pay the ridiculous aftermarket prices for the mask. We also got the silver version with Toa Ignika back in 2008, and a slightly smaller version for the glatorian version of the Matanui figure. The Kanohi inika, or legendary Mask of Life, is basically one of the most powerful masks created in the Bionicle universe, and arguably is the most important mask on this list. It has a pretty interesting backstory both in-universe and outside. The reason for the 2006 designs being very different than the official design is because they hadn't actually locked down the look and feel of this mask until 2007, and it didn't even appear in physical form until 2008, which is why it went through many design changes throughout many different media before finally settling on this final appearance. The mask is directly supposed to evoke the Great Spirit robot on the front of the face, which is a really cool and unique design. Of course, in universe, this mask had the power to restore the Great Spirit's health in times of need. However, if the Matoran universe was beyond saving, the Inika would kill all of its inhabitants. As such, this was an incredibly powerful artifact that now has settled upon Spherus Magna, housing the spirit of Mana Nui. Some notable wearers of the Kanohi Inika are Matoro, who donned it to sacrifice his own body to restore Mana Nui, Toa Ignika, which was the body that Mana Nui created for himself within the Matoran universe, and of course, Mana Nui's physical glatorian form, which he used when he was traveling amongst the sands of Bara Magna. Moving on to here, we're skipping this row for now because we'll talk about those in a second, but here we have these 6 different Turaga masks. They were produced in the colors that the Turaga mask came in all the way back in 2001, and I've also included these special dual-molded silver and regular colored masks, which were introduced for the Matoran of Metru Nui. I really do appreciate how they actually did these in completely different colors, which really set them apart from the standard masks. However, the rarest part about this display, though, is this column of misprints right here. So these masks in red, blue, green, white, brown, and black did not actually appear in official sets in these colors, save for 2. The black Ruru here appeared with the Matoran Hafu in the Power Pack, and the red Ruru here appeared in a special Bionicle alarm clock of all things. Other than those though, these never actually appeared in any official sets in these colors, and again they are just factory misprints, which is why they are so rare. Thankfully, they weren't nearly as rare and expensive as, say, these silver protodermic nuva masks, but still, they were pretty pricey, and a lot of them ended up being closer to $100 after being shipped. I've also included these special 2 copper masks of victory. One is a lot more common than others, but these are both given out in Legoland Deutschland. Particularly the copper Komau will set you back around $80 to $90 on Bricklink for that piece alone. Also here are some of the Rahi recolors in black and yellow for the Manas, as well as a transparent blue Ruru for the eyes of the insectoid Rahi. So what exactly are these masks? Well, starting off, this is the Kanohi Huna, worn by Turaga Vakama. This is the noble version of the mask, which means that essentially it's powerless. However, the power is that it's the mask of concealment, which allows its user and any objects they're holding to turn completely invisible, although their shadow still remains. This was famously used by Toa Vakama during the battle with Makuta Pterodax in Metru Nui. Next up here is the Kanohi Rao, the Mask of Translation. Worn by Toa and Turaga no Kama, she used this to talk to Kikanalo during her search for Likon in the movie Legends of Metru Nui, which can be seen here. It allows its user to understand and speak in almost any written and spoken language. The next mask is the Kanohi Mahiki. This was worn by Toa and Turaga Matau, and it is the Mask of Illusion. This allows its user to create optical illusions and to shapeshift into another form, which again, Matau used in the movie Legends of Metru Nui to disguise himself as a Vaki and even to disguise himself as Nadiki and Kreka. The 4th mask here is the Kanohi Matatu, the Mask of Telekinesis, worn by Toa Nuju and later on by Turaga Nuju in the noble form you can see here. This allows its user to move targets within the range of their view by utilizing the power of thought, which Toa Nuju used to lift Vakama onto the Great Barrier in Legends of Metru Nui. Next up, the Kanohi Komau is the Mask of Mind Control, used by Toa and Turaga Oniwa. This mask allows its user to see into the mind of another and to control them, but only if the user has greater willpower than the target. And lastly, the Kanohi Ruru was used by Toa and Turaga Wanua, and it is the Mask of Night Vision. This allows its user to cast a beam of light that allows them and those nearby to see. It also gives them a small degree of X-ray vision as well. And yes, this is basically just a glorified flashlight. You can see the Ruru in action when Toa Wanua used it in Legends of Metru Nui to escape from the prison of Dark Hunters and later on to see through the floor.
Lastly, we have the legendary Kanohi Vahi in both colors, orange and flat dark gold. This is not nearly as rare as some of the other Misprints because you could actually get this in at least some retail sets, but it is still one of the rarer Bionicle masks from this era.
Much like the Kanohi Inika, the Kanohi Vahi was also a legendary Kanohi mask, containing the power of time. It allows its user to filter the sheer power to speed up or slow down time around a target. However, it cannot be used for time travel. The Vahi was prominently used by Toa Vakama in his battle against Makuta in the climax of the movie Legends of Metru Nui, and was also used by Toa Tahu Nuva against the Borak Call, which slowed time around them long enough for Gali to formulate a plan to defeat them.
And with that, we've summed up this massive wall display of 2001 to 2003. So let's now move on and move upwards to 2004. Going on up the staircase here, you can see I have a whole section dedicated to the masks of the 2004 and 2005 storyline, with a few extras in between. So again, I wanted to make sure I included all of the different faces of Bionicle characters, so I just kind of grouped them together with what made sense and what fits. Obviously, starting off, you have these 6 standard Toa Metru masks, which actually are the Toa versions of these masks here, which probably could have worked well alongside here, but I figured I'd just kind of restrict this display to 01 to 03, so I moved them up here.
Since we've already covered the exact power sets when we talked about them in their Turaga mask forms or the noble forms, there's really no point in going over the power sets twice. Just know that those powers could really only be used in this format of the masks when the Toa were wearing them, and the Turaga could only actually use a very limited version of those powers since they were in their noble forms. You'll also notice that I have displayed here the mutated hordika forms of these same masks. They do not retain the mask powers and essentially just act as the faces of the Toa hordika. That being said, since they're obviously still supposed to be the masks and just mutated, I figured it made sense to display them one after the other.
And then you have both versions of the Rakshi heads. Now these are actually a pretty interesting thing to look at because they actually come in very slightly different colors for some of them. You see, this top row here represents the original Rakshi heads. They came in slightly pearl and milky different colors, which you can kind of see the difference mostly in the white color here, pearl white versus regular white. But then when the Rahaga were released in 2005, they recolored most of these masks. The only one that stayed the same was just this black Rakshi mask right here, but honestly, I didn't want to include just one of them because it would have looked really weird in the display, so I just put 2 of them for show. That being said though, you can see that they actually have minute differences in color for everything else, some more noticeable than others. Of course you have your dark red, dark blue, and dark green, but when you go to white and brown, the colors actually slightly differ as well. You can very clearly see it in brown, and for white, you kinda just have to have the pieces in hand to see the difference. One is just plain white, and one is pearl white.
So obviously, since these are not Kanohi masks, they don't actually have any unique power sets or skills of their own, they really just form the faces of the Rakshi and the Rahaga themselves.
Moving on, for the rest of this row down here, these are just some of these stranger recolors and Rakshi-inspired pieces, like the Stars Rakshi here, which was very difficult for me to figure out how to mount because the spine is attached, plus the silver Rakshi headpiece, which was used for the Rudaka buildable figure. Alongside here as well, we have different versions of the Metru masks, plus the masks that were used for the Toa Haga, particularly Iruni's mask here, which funnily enough was originally supposed to be a concept for Toa Nidiki, hence why it kinda looks like a Vaki head, as well as the one for Norik here, which originally was made for what was supposed to be Toa Duma, which is why Turaga Duma shares the same mask. I also included Likon's Hao right here as well because it kinda fits within that era.
So let's take a closer look at the power set of these masks. Iruni's mask is the Kanohi Kualsi, or the Mask of Quick Travel. It allows him to instantly move to any place in their field of vision, including through barriers they can see through. During the time that the Toa Haga revolted against the Brotherhood of Makuta, Toa Iruni used this Kualsi to teleport next to a cage holding 4 of his Rahaga companions. Meanwhile, the mask worn by Toa Norik and Turaga Duma is the Kanohi Kiril, or the Mask of Regeneration. It allows its user to repair damage to inorganic objects they can see. Turaga Duma used the somewhat limited powers of his noble Kanohi Kiril to begin reconstructing Metru Nui during the time that the Matoran were on Mata Nui.
Now the interesting thing here is that Actually, some of these masks are from a couple of years later. The Kanohi Rao, as you can see here, actually was released in 2006 under a slightly different color. You can see for the Toa Metru it was in a much darker transparent blue, and for the Matoran of Voya Nui it was made in a much lighter color. Obviously, LEGO actually probably just listed them as the same piece, but it was just a difference in how they produced transparent colors throughout the years, which is why they technically count as two different things. The much rarer one, though, was a recolor of the Ruru in dark blue, which only appeared in the very rare Karzani set, which you can see right here. It's one of the few times one of the original Metru masks has actually been recolored, and it is a really nice one to boot. That set also gave us a dark green Vakama Hordika mask. While it's a little less useful than, say, a recolor of the Metru mask, it's still pretty nice to get that as a completely different color than when it first appeared in. But moving away from the 2004 to 2005 era masks, it's time to take a look at what came out around 2006. Now these right here are not of course supposed to be the same masks, they actually switched out when they went underwater, but they're used by the same characters, so I figured to put them together. It's obviously the most simple of displays, showcasing just the rubber inika masks plus the mahri masks, although I actually do have to note that the mahri masks are some of my favorite masks ever made by Bionicle. Even Huki Mari's mask there. I just love how unique they are and how they actually incorporate some transparent elements as well.
Let's kick things off with the semi-organic mask the Toa Inika used during the 2006 storyline. Starting off, when Jaller arrived on the island of Voya Nui and was transformed into a Toa Inika, he wore the Kanohi Calyx, or the Mask of Fate, which allowed him to perform at the absolute peak of his natural physical abilities. At this physical peak, he could run, leap, and dodge more quickly and precisely than almost any unenhanced member of his species. For instance, he used the Calyx to save Holly from falling into lava by performing a near impossible leap over a chasm. Next up, we have the Kanohi Elda, worn by Toa Inika Holly. It is the Mask of Detection, which allowed her to see nearby hidden beings and even track the Kanohi Inika, which actually is the main purpose of the mask. As such, whenever she was near the Kanohi Inika, she continued to have a series of headaches, although at that time Holly was not exactly sure what they meant. Next up, we have the Kanohi worn by Toa Inika Kongu, the Kanohi Suletu, or the Mask of Telepathy. It allowed its user to read the thoughts of other beings and to project the thoughts of a user or a target into another being's mind. For instance, Kongu used the Suletu to listen to the Kanohi Ignika's thoughts and transfer them into Vezon's mind in Inferno, which distracted him for long enough for an attack. Next up, we have the Kanohi Aiden, the Mask of Spirit, worn by Toa Inika Matoro. It allowed him to temporarily release his spirit from his body, and when released, his spirit could move at great speeds and inhabit other living, spiritless biomechanical bodies, or robots. For example, Matoro used the Kanohi Aiden to monitor Holly's progress as she attempted to retrieve the Kanohi Inika while underwater. The second to last organic Inika mask is the Kanohi Sanok, or the Mask of Accuracy. Worn by Toa Inika Huki, it allowed him to turn virtually any inanimate object into a projectile weapon and hit almost any target he aimed for. This was particularly useful for Huki given his background as a Koli athlete, and used it many times to achieve perfect accuracy when shooting his Zamor spheres. Finally, we have the Kanohi Kaden, or the Mask of Flight. This was worn by Toa Inika Nuparu, which allowed him to soar through the sky. One of the best examples of the Kanohi Kaden in action was when Nuparu used it to fly through Zaktan, breaking apart his prototype body. But with all of the organic Inika masks summed up, it's time to move on to 2007, and travel with the Toa as they ventured into the deep waters, becoming the Toa Mari. The first mask we have here was worn by Toa Mari Jaller, the Kanohi Arthron, or the Mask of Sonar. It allows its user to sense the movement and positions of targets through echolocation, and for example, Jaller used this mask to detect the Paraka in the cord. Next up, we have the Kanohi Faxon, the Mask of Kindred. Worn by Toa Mari Holly, it allowed her to mimic the powers of Rahi that shared their general environment. As such, since Holly was underwater, she could use the Faxon to replicate a sea creature's hypnotic ability, lulling a giant squid to sleep. Next up, we have the Kanohi Zath. Worn by Toa Mari Kongu, it was the Mask of Summoning, allowing him to summon one or more random Rahi or creatures to his location for help. You can see the Zath in action when Kongu summoned an ancient sea behemoth to his location, unfortunately meaning that he could not control the monster when it arrived. Next up, we have the Kanohi Trina, worn by Toamari Matoro. It is the mask of reanimation, allowing its user to give artificial life to and control dead bodies for as long as they maintain concentration. The amount of concentration required to keep the corpses animated increases with the number of corpses controlled. An interesting fact about this mask is that obviously due to its immoral nature, Toa would normally not wear this mask. However, the Kanohi inika granted Matoro this mask as a test of his character. And as such, Matoro found the power of the Trina disturbing and only used it when he had no other options. Moving on, we have the Kanohi Garai, or the Mask of Gravity. Worn by Toamari Huki, it allowed him to increase or decrease a target's gravitational pull, and for instance, he used it on a 300-foot-long mutant venom eel, making it crash into the seabed and knocking it unconscious. Lastly, we have the Kanohi Volatak. This Mask of Stealth was worn by Toamari Nuparu, which camouflaged and deadened the sound around its user, making that user harder to see or hear. Nuparu used this Kanohi Volatak to sneak out of the cave he was forced into by the Baraki.
Let's now move on to the 2008 styled masks. All the way down here you can see the collection of the masks released in 2008 for the Toa Nuva, especially when they went into the swamps of Kanohi. You can see right here that these masks are actually supposed to be the same masks that are up above, say the Hau, Kaukau, Miru, etc., but unfortunately they don't really resemble them too much, despite a few very minor similarities between them. Which is why you can see right here I tried to display them separately and also displayed them alongside the villains as well. Right here you can see the adapted Hau Nuva, the adapted Kaukau Nuva, adapted Miru, adapted Akaku, adapted Kakama, and the adapted Bakari, which looks nothing like how it actually appeared all the way back in 2001, unfortunately.
So what's the story behind this adaptive armor? Well, in 2008, the Toa were given specialized proto-steel armor designed by Artaka, which detects its environment using onboard sensors and automatically shapeshifts to fit its wearer's surroundings. To quote Artaka, "Wherever you journey, they will adapt to your surroundings. No terrain, no climate, no wind or wave will ever be your master." And as such, when the Toa ventured into the skies of Kanohi and the swamps of Kanohi, their armor changed accordingly, featuring much more aerodynamic designs and even some specialized flight equipment for every single Toa. The downside though is that the adaptations to the original Nuva masks meant that you can barely even tell that they're supposed to be the actual Toa Nuva masks themselves, and that's why I've kind of put them in their own separate display to represent the entire year of 2008. One cool thing though is that the Matoran of 2008 also got unique masks of their own, specifically representing noble versions of these masks. We'll take a look at that in a second. Also represented here are the villain masks from 2008, namely the mask that Makuta wore in Kanohi. First of all, we have the Kanohi Jutlin, worn by Makuta Antraz and Spiria. It is the mask of corruption, which allows them to break down inorganic objects, even proto-steel, within their range of vision, causing them to decompose and rust. Also included here is the noble version of the Jutlin, worn by the Matoran Radiac after he was corrupted by a Shadow Leech. There's even a third variant of the Jutlin which was used by Antron to pilot the Jetrax T6, which was a shapeshifted version of it to allow himself to better pilot the craft. Moving on from that, we have the Kanohi Avza, the Mask of Hunger, worn by Makuta Vampra. This allowed Vampra to drain light, energy, or positive emotions from a target at a distance, even to the point that it could kill the target. For instance, Vampra used the Kanohi Avza on Toa Nuva Kopaka to drain his energy throughout the comics, as well as using the mask to drain Radiac's light to turn him into a Shadow Matoran. Much like the Jutlin, a noble version of the Kanohi Avza was used by the Matoran Gavla, who formerly used a kaukau before being transformed into a Shadow Matoran. Moving on from that, we have the Kanohi Felnus, the Mask of Disruption, worn by Makuta Gorast. This allows their user to cause any one natural active power of another being to go out of control, as long as they're touching their target. For instance, Gorast used her Felnas to Senpo Hatu's elemental power of stone out of control, causing him to bury himself and Photok in a giant boulder. From there we have the Kanohi Motrek, worn by Biddle. It is the Mask of Time Duplication, which allows its user to transport one or more past versions of themselves to the present. When these past selves are returned to their times, all memories of what they did are erased, but physical damage they sustained is kept. And if a past self is killed, the user will vanish, and an alternate timeline where they did not exist will be created. It's a pretty interesting power, and one that Toa would not normally use, because they would see this power as immoral, especially because it's associated with the Makuta. Its wearer, Makuta Biddle, actually often considered this Motric a curse as well as a blessing, because he often found himself injured at random times without any memory of what happened after fighting in future battles. Next up is the Kanohi Krast, the Mask of Repulsion, worn by Makuta Krika. It allows its user to repel other objects from them for offense or defense, and can even act as a shield. The user can also achieve limited flight by repelling the ground. Krika used this mask against one of his fellow Makuta, Goras, sending her into a stalactite. Lastly, we have the Kanohi Shellac. This was worn by Makuta Chirox and Mutron, which is the Mask of Silence. This allows its user to simultaneously disable a target's ability to speak or hear as long as the user concentrates. It was used by Chirox to temporarily deafen and mute Takanuva so he and Biddle could ambush him.
Now, of course, on this villainous and Makuta side of things, I had to represent the Kanohi Krakon, the Mask of Shadows. Now, these are all different variants of the mask. Again, you can see right here, this is the original one with 6 holes on the top. The updated one, which was introduced for the Makuta Ikarak set, with only 4 holes instead of 6. Now, eagle-eyed viewers may note that there's actually a few missing ones here. If you'll notice, there's 6 holes here, 4 holes on this one. Actually, there was another one with only 5 holes, but that was kind of just a weird factory misprint. Moving on, we have the movie-styled Kanohi Krakon, or the Mask of Shadows, right here, which, I'm going to be completely honest, doesn't really look all too much like how it appeared in the movie, but I appreciate the effort. As well as the Ultimate Duma mask, which was technically supposed to be the Krakon as well, just worn atop Ultimate Duma's face.
So this is the Kanohi Krakon, or the Mask of Shadows. Famously worn by Makuta Pterodax and later Ikarax, it allows its user to access Makuta-level range and strength of power over anger, fear, and elemental shadow. It also lets the user see moral darkness in others. It automatically sends out shadow bolts to attack non-Makuta beings who touch it whenever it's not being worn. The masks you can see here are many of its different variants over the years, which we just discussed, plus the flat dark gold version, which was introduced in the Bionicle system sets for the Battle of Metru. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, when LEGO changed their plastic color from flat dark gold to pearl gold, there was a pearl gold version of the Kanohi Krakon in existence, but unfortunately I cannot find that for sale literally anywhere. Again, if you're selling it, please let me know in the comments and I'll talk to you. But what else is included at the bottom of this chart? Well, you can see here that there is a recolor of the Kanohi Krast, which was Krika's mask. Unfortunately, we actually were also supposed to get a recolor of this in black for the LEGO Atlantis Portal to Atlantis set, but that was just in the prototype version and they changed it for the final set. So we still get one recolor, which is still pretty cool, in this silver color, which was used for one of the vehicles of 2009. Also included here was the Mask of Scavenging, also known as the Mask of Vulture, which is used by the Matoran Vultres. It doesn't actually have a canon name other than just the Mask of Scavenging, but it allows its user to drain the residual life energy from the bodies of any nearby beings that have just died, which makes him stronger and more able. Obviously, since this mask encourages murder, the Toa would consider this mask immoral. Also here is the adaptive flight version of the Miru and the Kakama, which were used by Liwa and Pohatu respectively to pilot their flying craft. We also have a recolored green version of the Kanohi Shellac, or the Mask of Silence, which was used by Mutron and Vikon in both the Great and Noble versions shown here.
But with that, we've basically summed up all of these standard canister-sized Toa masks and villain masks as well, but don't go yet because there's still a ton to cover. We still have the entirety of G2, the Creature and Vaki heads from 04 and 05, villain heads from 06 and 07, and a few final Kanohi masks and other Titan-related stuff from 2006 and 2007 as well. Plus all of the Krana from 2002, and finally the helmets of the 2009 Bara Magna series. Let's just start right off with the final Kanohi masks on this list on this panel right here.
First off, we have the Kanohi Road. Worn by Axon, it was the Mask of Truth. It allowed him to see through all types of deception and disguises, and also allowed him to see and communicate with users of the Kanohi Iden. A road can only detect lies when the target is aware that they are lying. The mask power also enables its user to see those with the power of invisibility. An example of the road in use was when Axon used his road in Destiny War to ascertain whether or not Toa Krakua was speaking the truth about being a messenger of the Order of Mananui. Next up, we have the Kanohi Olmec, the Mask of Dimensional Gates, worn by Brutaka and later on by Vezon. The Olmec allows its user to transport themselves and other targets to different locations or dimensions via dimensional portals. The user of an Olmec could only create one portal at a time, but they could also form gateways that stayed open without their concentration if they wished. As such, even beings who did not wear Olmecs, like Takanuva, could emerge from portals created by other users wielding Kanohi Olmecs, as can be seen in the picture here. And finally, the last Kanohi on this display is a lime recolor of the Kanohi Faxon, or the Mask of Kindred, which we discussed with the Toamari. And with that, that's every single Kanohi mask in the Bionicle universe. But there's still a few other Titan masks up here to talk about. First of all, on the top here, we have the head that was used by Fenrak, which was Vezon's monster spider, and was also recolored in dark red for some of the steeds used in Barra Magna. We also have Hydraxon's faceplate, which is not a Kanohi mask because he's purely just a robotic being, which was also recolored in black for the Hero Factory line, but obviously I included here because it is a recolor of a Bionicle mask. Similarly, we also have the mask that Maxilos wore. Again, not really a Kanohi mask and just a faceplate, although you could argue that it kind of resembles the Kanohi How. Moving on downwards, we have some recolors of Baraki heads, which we'll talk about when we get to them, but we also have the headpiece used for Gadunka, which is one of the largest molded LEGO Bionicle headpieces ever, as well as the head for Spinax, who was Maxilos' guard dog.
This is the massive display for every single Bionicle Krana released in 2002. Now, the Krana were the parasitic creatures that powered the Borak, and they were released in many different colors. Other much more rare Krana included vacuum metal Krana and some solid sterling silver Krana, which are very, very hard to come by nowadays. So unfortunately, these are just basically the standard ones that you can get from these sets. You can see that they are separated off in colors for the standard Borak, the Borak Va, and the Borak Call down here. Moving on upwards, let's now take a look at the 2004 to 2005 villain heads, and these are pretty standard. You got the Vaki right here, nothing crazy going on, plus two special different flat dark gold Vizirek carapaces from the 2005 system sets, alongside these standard Vizirek carapaces as well. Unfortunately, there are some pearl gold Vizirek carapaces that I do not own specifically because of that molding error, but hopefully if I come across them on Bricklink one day, I'll add them to my collection. From there, we can jump forwards all the way up to 2005, where you can see I've included not just the standard Paraka spines, right alongside here, with a special golden spine for Ernak, which is pretty expensive nowadays, but we've also got a whole display for the special canister toppers. These were actually only included on the tops of the Paraka canisters, kind of odd pieces to have as masks. They don't actually connect to anything, so I had to use some rubber bands to secure them on, but they are there because they are technically Paraka heads, despite being very, very strange pieces. Of course, I had to include the Stars Paraka, officially named Nektan, and then we have the Baraki heads as well. And speaking of the Baraki, they actually got a lot of recolors in some of these system sets, so let's take a look at those right now.
From left to right, we have Kalma's head, then Takadox, which comes in two different colors, one in white for the System 2007 sets, and one in gunmetal gray for armor on Shadow Takanuva. We have Elix mask, which again, also just one color, Pridax head here, and then we have Karpar's head. This was recolored in two different colors, one in glow-in-the-dark blue for Nocturne, and one in a dual-molded black and white variant for the system sets. Lastly, we have the head for Mantax, which again, just comes in this one color.
And finally, we can turn our gaze to the denizens of Barra Magna. Right here are all of the Barra Magna styled helmets that were featured in 2009.
On the top row here, we have the helmets worn by the Agori, which got some recolors down the line, particularly for the Barracks helmet. Next up is the line of helmets for the Glatorian, and then the Glatorian Legends here with Matanui's mask swapped out for some of the other helmets used, because of course the mask for Matanui is the Kanohi Inika, displayed alongside the other Inika. Down here we have some other miscellaneous Glatorian helmets, mostly from either the vehicles or Titans in Tuma's case, as well as a recolor for the Gresh helmet in the Stars format, which unfortunately, in my opinion, is a little bit less cool than the original one, which featured some dual molded dark green and lime coloring, whereas the recolored one is just purely lime. This was also an era where Bionicle was introducing some dual-use helmets, particularly in the 4 down at this bottom row here, with the spiky green helmet being used for the front face of one of the creatures, where the backside of it was used for the helmet on the pilot of Scopio. The same can be said for this other glatorian helmet here, which was used for either larger glatorian or smaller agori, flipped around for different styles. But that was the final wall display for the entirety of Bionicle Generation 1, from 2001 to 2010. And now we can turn our gaze to Bionicle G2 from 2015 to 2016.
Let's start off with these masks here. We have the 6 protector masks plus the different recolors of the standard Toa masks. Now, one thing you may immediately notice is that I do not actually own the LEGO Inside Tour version of the Mask of Water. All of these masks here are supposed to represent the elemental powered versions of the Toa's masks, so you kind of have this transparent piece on the top of them. Unfortunately, the one for the Mask of Water only came out in the LEGO Inside Tour, and you can buy it on Bricklink right now for $2,000. So unless I'm feeling particularly generous with my money at some point, I probably will not be buying that, which is why I had an empty spot to fill and an extra mask anyways. I've placed the special Comic-Con HAL mask here anyways.
So these masks are actually pretty rare in their own right. The first clear Tahu fire mask right here was introduced only at the New York Comic-Con, all the way back when Bionicle was announced in 2015, and as such it's pretty rare on Bricklink. The same goes for this other mask I have right here, the transparent neon green Skull Scorpio mask, which was only released as part of a San Diego Comic-Con promo, even came in the same packaging that they used to package the SDCC minifigures in, and again obviously since that's a con exclusive, it was another very rare mask.
Now before we move on to 2016 onwards, let's take a look at something very special up here. Now these are not technically official LEGO pieces. Instead, they're custom chromed elements of the standard Toa and Ikimu masks. Now I specifically chose these 8 chrome masks for a reason. You see, when Bionicle's reboot was first announced in 2015, they actually showcased some solid gold masks at New York Toy Fair, and these were the 8 masks they did it for. The 6 Toa heroes, the Skull Spider mask, and Ikimu's Mask of Creation. And so, while of course some of those are unfortunately completely lost, we don't know who owns some of them, for example, because they were given out randomly to kids via contests, I just managed to get the closest approximation here, and something I think is a really cool thing. These are actually custom chrome by a vendor known as Chrome Block City, which I've linked down in the description below if you want to check that out. I also actually did my own special video on these chrome masks, which you can see linked in the description below as well. So definitely check that out if you want a closer look at these very special Kanohi. Moving on to 2016 though, here we have some of these special masks like the Mask of Creation, which technically was released in 2015, plus the Mask of Control in both of its versions, the standard version and the infected version, all of the different colors for the Skull Spider mask, and the skull mask on the side here, plus Umarak. I still to this day do not know what the red version of Umarak's mask was supposed to be. I'm guessing it was supposed to be some sort of a story tie-in before they had to rewrite the final episodes due to its abrupt cancellation. One of the most special ones here is something that was actually a Russia exclusive. The skull mask in pearl gold right here only came in a very strange polybag, so I was pretty happy to be able to get that off of Bricklink. Moving on, we have the creature heads all lined up right here, plus the different masks for the Toa heroes in their Uniter forms. I've also included the Beast mask alongside them just to fill the gaps and make this a cohesive display, because there really wasn't any other place to put the Beast mask anyway. I really actually like the designs for some of these evolved masks for the most part, especially Kopaka's right here, which actually integrates a real LEGO stud into the mask there. But with that, we've taken a look at all of the G2 Bionicle masks on display on my shelves, and in total, all of the Bionicle heads, masks, and helmets over the many years of the Bionicle theme. I hope you enjoyed this showcase, and again, let me know which are your favorites in the comments below.
Alright, I hope you enjoyed this very special look at pretty much every single LEGO Bionicle mask all together in one place, in one display. Let me know down in the comments below which of these masks is your favorite, and again, please let me know if you have a pearl gold Kanohi Kraken. But that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed this special Bionicle collection look, and thank you all so much for tuning into Duckbricks. Stay tuned for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. Thanks, and bye-bye for now.